right, welcome everybody. So we've been doing this slowdown over the last few weeks, and it has been really fun. It has been more than fun. It has been useful because stuff is not for fun. Right, Nia Scott, and she said, "Yeah." She's just like, you know what, man? We're gonna go with your crazy today. Actually, question, Nia, how are you feeling after your half marathon?
I actually feel really good. So shout out to BioFreeze.
Frozen. All right. So before we jump into a new, teaching series. What? I don't know what's happening. Before we touch into a new series on staffing next week, I thought we'd do one more week of questions. And so one more week on, and it's not just questions, right? What I'm about to say is another form of question, but just to help you maybe get something out. It might not be something that you have a question in your leadership, but a topic that you're interested in the areas of leadership of building teams, in the area of leading yourself, in the area of like jumping into your calling. I know some of you here are in the middle of navigating what you're in and what God is promised you, vision over your life. How do you develop vision in your life? There's so many different things we could touch on. I want you to specifically as well, if you've been in Staffy regularly, think of the things we've touched on this year that you would have liked to have touched on deeper. You didn't get a chance to talk and debrief. That's the purpose of this slowdown, is for you to go, man, we don't usually get to talk about or ask questions on, I'd love to know. And so we're going to utilize that before next week. We'll do another 3 teachings and then we'll slow down again for you to be able to ask questions on. So new flow, I'm excited for it. Carla's excited for it. She just told me, she was like, man, I love this. And so she's in. Over to everybody. Questions, topics you want to know more about, hit us. And as usual, you can direct it to a person in the room or in the digital room. A to the men. Thank you, Pastor Joe, for praying.
I don't think we prayed.
Question number 1. What do you do with that one person? As my wife just grooms me in front of everybody. It's like we're chimps. All right. Thank you, Jesus, for Gio. And thank you for this meeting. We pray that you come into it, although Gio did not give you an invitation. Amen.
That's unfair.
All right. Over to you guys. Let's utilize our time. Hit us. What you got?
I've got one. Starting with, I guess, a global question. Going back over that you did last year on vision, and I think you started with it's one vision, bringing people to Jesus and Jesus to people, but then there's the outworking of the fashion, there's the outworking of third things. So my first global question is, how much of the vision for the kids or our service experience team is new versus it's just a outworking or branch off of a bigger picture vision?
Yeah.
And I was just thinking about the breakdown of the standard dimension or the values dimension. Is it the values of our church that just should be the same as the values for our service experience team, or are we expecting them to be or something different?
Fantastic question, and one that actually a lot of organizations, period, can struggle with. A lot of churches often struggle with. You'll go to some churches and the youth has a vision statement, and the church has a vision statement, the college has a vision statement. And, it's been my experience teaching and kind of culture that I've been brought up in as far as church goes, and even just thinking through companies and stuff. Look, it's important to have one vision. If you have more than one vision, as the adage goes, you've got division, right? So, but the key, I think, is making sure that the vision you have is big enough for many people and many things to come under it. So the idea of bringing people to Jesus and Jesus to people or across major cities around the world, pushing into dark spaces and places that the church has not often, dominated in or influenced, is very broad and can be interpreted all the way down the line. And so whilst fashion is talking about, okay, it feels called to outwork that vision in the space of women and how to empower women, the vision is still the same. You know what I mean? The values of the house are still the same. With youth, it comes down to youth, but it's still the same. When it comes to college, it's still the same. So the idea is much like the Great Commission. And if I say this at every growth track, hey, like Great Commission, there's nothing new there. Like this is everyone. This is every believer. But how we outwork it as People Church is different to how another church outworks it down the road. And I think even you yourself, right? How you outwork it is different in your workplace than someone else. Why? Because what changes it is the context. What changes it is the gifting. What changes it is the person that's actually doing it. But the vision is big enough. And that's kind of my thought as well for everybody that's wondering on the trajectory of their calling. How does that work with kingdom? A question that we've had a lot has been, hey, my partner is business oriented and I'm ministry in the four walls oriented. How does that work? And for me, it's like, well, we're all building the kingdom. And I think sometimes what we don't understand this vision question as a concept in general. And what happens is you get a lot of fractured Christians where they live one way in one space and another way in the other space. But the truth is congruency is the goal, bringing everything under the kingdom. So like you could be a kingdom, if you're kingdom minded, there's no person that's doing a more valuable position or it's not different in church than it is in the workspace. It's like, no, we're all doing the same thing. We're all doing it from a different perspective. We might have different jobs. It's an assembly line and we might be in different places, but we're all reaching and heading towards the same goal. And that is bringing people to Jesus. Whether you do it through influence, workspaces, finances, marketing, whatever it is, we all do the same thing. It's the same thing for any church. The reason we called it People Church is that we wanted there to be space for each context to add to the vision and culture of the vision, not subtract from it. So I love that Toronto looks a little different than Chicago because it's the name People Church is that the people would bring a certain expression of that vision according to the city that they're in. So Tokyo will look different. Mexico City will look a little different. But values are not about values shape things, but they shouldn't completely control things in the sense that it's the way we think, feel, and act. But how that translates is different, right? Like you could have different service times in a city. You could have different creativity slightly in a city, but the soul of it should still look the same. People should be able to go, oh man, that's People Church. And like, I think people that do this well quite often is clothing brands. You know, if you go to a flagship store in Dubai, it looks a little bit different to a flagship store in Tokyo and a flagship store in Chicago and a flagship store in LA. They typically keep the soul of the brand with the context that they're in. And I think that's the way that vision outworks itself globally and through the different areas. And I think it's how we as Christians outwork, that we're all doing the same thing, whether I'm up on the pulpit or you're in the boardroom, it doesn't change. Like we're still doing the same thing. We're building the kingdom. So it's a really good question.
I think as well there's different ministries in church that are feeders to Sundays. So fashion would be one of them. So we exist as obviously a women's objective is the Sunday service. So it's just the front door kind of thing. And sometimes it might be somebody's first front door experience into a Sunday experience, which that was exactly Shannon's story. She came to a fashion, it was a Christmas event she spoke at because we wanted to partner with a minister or an organization that she was sitting on the board at the time. And she came, spoke to us at our women's event, and then that following Sunday, I think he came to People Church, and she's been coming ever since. So it's, I think that some of these ministries exist to basically funnel into the bigger, vision of People Church, ultimately.
Yeah. Yep. Was it Carla that had a question that she was coming up with?
I found it.
She's on the production team.
Pastor Chris, you said that you were going to speak about, and I think I'm butchering it, but you said you were going to speak about this, Kathy, about leading somebody. What's the difference between leading and something else? And I was like, oh, that caught my attention. But I can't remember what the something else was. Does anybody else remember?
What's that?
Leading and pastoring, leading and
Or
shepherding.
leading a band.
Oh, was it leading and shepherding, or was it the difference between leading people and leading things?
I think it was leading and shepherding.
You
Yeah.
asked people about
Yeah.
pastoring to get healthier versus leading people to more, and like the difference in how you lead those separately versus together.
Yeah.
At the end of last copy.
Yes. Yes, I will. Yeah, look, I will. But what I think that's for me, I do want to do a staffy on that. And I think that was where I was heading for this next one coming up, because it's been a theme amongst a lot of my meetings with a lot of the like team. But I could touch on like where the thought originated from and some of the nuances, and kind of maybe give us a bit of a prep, kind of a teaser for like next staffing. But basically what I've noticed, right, is I think just ever since I've been in church, you've got the role of pastor and the office of pastor, and they have this great gift. And then you've got the people that are deemed to have a leadership gift, and they've got a great gift. And then I think as time's gone on, I think the global church has been talking and recognizing the word shepherding as well, being maybe a better kind of like a very needed role that happens in what we do in ministry. And then I think as I've studied the word and then had personal experience, I say unfortunately because I hated it, but I got a friend that roped me, and I've preached on it a few times, but he was like, I was leaving Sydney to go move to the Gold Coast to be a youth pastor. And he's like, he was someone I led, and he was like, man, I would love to take you away to my family's farm, and we could go shooting, and it's in the middle of nowhere. It'll be super fun. I'm thinking, this is great. I've never shot a gun. It's not common in Australia. So I was like, yeah, let's go shooting. And we go. We drove 6 hours only to find that as soon as I'm like, so we're going to go shooting? He's like, yeah. So my brother just bought a whole bunch of sheep, and we've got to go like look after them. All that to say that experience taught me a lot about what God references us as to be, but even just shepherding as a whole. Because as you shepherd sheep, like basically, the whole saying, if you pull the wool over a sheep's eyes, is that if the wool grows over, they won't actually venture out to find more grass, and they will end up dying where they stand, even though there's grass around them. And, you have to move them from pasture to pasture. You have to protect them. There's, some brute a bit to it, actually. There's a lot of like forcing them into things. There's a lot of like, it's this weird thing. So where I go with shepherding is that shepherding is a moving gift, and so is leading. But what I find with shepherding is the day-to-day keeping something alive and helping it grow. But leading is taking something and teaching it how to take people somewhere, and how to take an organization or a group somewhere. The leadership gift in the moment where Jethro and Moses talk has spheres to it. Like Moses' father-in-law Jethro says, hey, the way you're leading these people is not good. And he's like, you need to find amongst you leaders, people that have the gift to manage and lead 50s, hundreds, and thousands. And like, you've now got to release them, because the way you're leading the people is not good for the people. And over my time, what I have found is that a shepherding conversation quite often, whilst can seem tough, is usually about letting the person get healthier. And people will often more quickly lean into that conversation. But what I've found about leading conversations is that they're a lot about like shaping people. And when you have to shape people, it's the kind of tough conversation that's more like iron sharpening iron. And that is grating. And that is a little more, it's tough. It's not quickly accepted. It's a far more challenging style conversation. And I think that the reason I want to do a staffy on it is that I want to develop just 10 differentiators on each side that helps you understand, because they're both necessary. I think I want to differentiate it as well, because I want each of us that are in the room to understand what our inclinations and giftings are in those areas. And then for those that lead departments, how do you know the difference between you're shepherding and pastoring someone and leading someone? And they are biblically different gifts, you know what I mean? So like the gift of leadership and the gift of pastoring, but they both do move people. Like, I often will over my time as a pastor, I've actually really partnered a lot with the pastoring gift. And I've after I lead someone and I define the big what's next, I find the pastoring gift is almost an executional gift of how to get there. And so it's a really good differentiator, because I've watched as well, a lot of people with the pastoring gift never build teams. They'll have a lot of people they love and a lot of people that love them. But the tough conversation that will really move people often is not within their strength or their suit. They often will just draw away from it. So I think we have to differentiate it, because as we are all leading, I think we have to know the difference between I'm making you healthy and I'm making you bigger.
That's good.
Do you happen to have any books that you would recommend for leadership or pastoring?
Yeah. Let me say this on that too. With all these books, let me put a little observation out there with books. Don't be what I call college kid syndrome, where the current book they're reading is their current reality and ethos and Bible. Don't live a book too quickly.
So true.
Without first digesting it and counterbalancing it with more books and more experience.
That's so good.
Because I think a lot of people will write books and and sometimes a book is a bestseller because a person's gifted, but not always, I just don't be too quick to make it your new Bible. Okay. So that's my caveat with that. And the second thing being as well, that books, I would encourage you to maybe, rather than devouring a whole bunch of books all the time, give yourself a bit of a quota for the year on books that are going to spur practical implementation, so that you actually get good at what you've just learned. Because if we think about a learning model in education, or even in a trade perspective, right? If you were to go learn how to be a hairdresser, a plumber, or anything, it's a lot of modules. And let's see how your knowledge and your practicality of how you outwork the knowledge actually happens. And let's tick off that you can do it before you move to the next module. And I think what we've got to understand is that we got to know how to live as leaders from two different spaces. Knowledge sometimes presents itself as ability, and it's not. That's why some people are better coaches than they are players, because knowledge is not the same as ability. And I think quite often we misplace that, because I have read about this or I have knowledge, that therefore I should be promoted into a space, I'm ready for a place, or whatever it might be. And I think knowledge is just one side, and then know-how and how to actually implement that is another thing. So what I would say is that there is the building of a skill set is when what is in here can actually manifest to what these things can produce, to what your mouth can produce. And what I put all that together to say that there are lots of books I've read, anything John Maxwell, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, his 21 anything series that he's got. It's great, but what I found was I was reading it as a youth pastor, right? I'm going, oh, I need to do that one, and I need to do that one, I need to do that one, and on that one, and then how do I get good at that one? And it was almost like, all right, 21 of these, I've got to do all 21 of these. And it was like, I didn't realize that this is something I've got to grow into. And I think then I've written, Bill Hybels has a good book called Axiom, and it's a whole bunch of leadership axioms that were just really, really good. And one of them that stuck with me for life is labor over words. And because a word will become sticky, and when it's sticky, people can carry it. Hence, retreat a few years ago, drag the net, was a sticky word that actually seeped into the fabric of how we did church and still does. So I would say that, great question, Fallon, read those leadership books. Another good one is It by Craig Rochelle, because it really starts to talk on the fact that, hey, there's something that is outside. A leader needs soul. And there needs to be something in what you lead that people are attracted to. I think we can sometimes make leadership so pragmatic, forgetting that actually, as the saying goes, the best way to build a boat is not get people passionate about boat building, but get people passionate about the ocean, and the boat will build itself. And I think sometimes in we don't understand the layering and the complexity that goes into leading teams.
Yeah.
And we don't realize that it's both systems, it is structures, it is vision, it is soul, it is heart, it is challenge, it is gifting. So read the books, but start a journey towards leadership. Don't try and make it, I'm going to read this book and fix my leadership.
Yep. Great.
Another good one that is just a secular book is Extreme Ownership.
Yeah.
I love that book because I think every leader needs to practice it if they're ever going to build a team. One of my favorite lines there is that there are no bad teams, just bad leaders. For everybody who feels like they've been dealt a bad card in the people they lead, please understand it's not the people, it's the leader.
That's good.
Another good one is that I like from a heart perspective of alignment is For This I Was Born by Brian Houston. And keep in mind, some of the books that you're going to read, people are under, some people are still doing that. Some people have fallen from grace. Some people have controversy. Look, we got to apply a normal, what you would do in theology, which is you don't read every book to believe it. You read every book to learn and question and shape. And we should always do that and understand that the work is the good work and that can stand for itself. So that's another good one. On a shepherding perspective, what is it called? It's some. It was big over pandemic. The name's escaping me, but another one is Blessed Church by Robert Morris. I think he talks a lot about feeding the sheep and equipping the saints and talking about leadership from a healthy perspective and how in my takeaway, basically it was like, you could have all the great leadership in the world, but it's hard to lead wounded people or underfed people. So that was a really good kind of concept. And I think it's Peter Scorsese, is it? And it's Emotionally Healthy Leader.
Yeah.
I think that's got a lot of shepherding concepts to it. It's got a lot of health-based concepts, a lot of like, how do we, be healthier leaders? That way we create healthier environments. I think that's got a crossover of, those books I gave you are good crossovers of shepherding and leadership that I think cross over to the ministry space well and corporate space, just to name a few.
I have a question.
Shayla.
What are some what's some advice that you all have or maybe good references for leaders who may be generally healthy, but they're experiencing a season of deep anguish or suffering or grief, so much to the point that it's affecting their leadership at this point? Like what resources would you, or what things could that person lean into more to help them with that?
Fantastic question, man. Love that. I'll let everyone else, if there's anything. If not, I can jump in and give my 2 cents.
Can you repeat the question?
A leader that's generally healthy, but they're just going through some personal anguish to the point where it's affecting their leadership. What would you say to them, or what books could they read, or what could they lean on? All right, I'll say a few things then, Shayla, and then people can jump in off of it. First thing I would read is Psalms. Psalms, anything written from David, is a great understanding of the burden of leadership through the moments of trials and anguish. A lot of what David talks about is just absolute personal anguish as he's carrying this burden to leading a people. There's moments of persecution, there's moments of loss. It deals with mistakes. It deals with mistakes that brought anguish, loss that brought anguish, and as well as personal and external persecution that brought anguish, which in my general experience has been a lot of the kind of anguish we experience as leaders. I think even going through and reading anything Numbers, First Chronicles, Second Chronicles, Kings, and leading and seeing a lot of what that looks like. There's a lot of broken people having to lead in the Bible, and I think it's one of my favorite and best, because what it gives you is the way that they lent on God, the way that God came through, what it looks like to keep your integrity intact, how to hold on to promises. Job is fantastic for that. The second construct I would say is that I love your question, because it is a reality of leadership. It is one of the most difficult aspects of leadership, talking from personal experience. Ord and I have gone through moments of anguish and had to preach through them and lead through them, from personal, sickness to loss to all sorts of things. And I would say it's something that hits a leader quite often. I would say making sure you have a mentor and a group of people that are running as fast as you, that you can lean on, that are going to pray for you, that you can go vent to, that you can go cry to, that you can go collapse around, and just be in your distress or someone's distress, is super important. I think making sure that in those seasons, you do, I think, a few things. Make sure you feed your soul, like you do something that you enjoy to rejuvenate, that you go somewhere that you keep your spirit strong. So you up your worship, you up your prayer, you lean into God, you don't fall away from it, you fall into Him is a big thing. And then I would say is like confession and profession, professing the promises and confessing the vision and the things that God has given you. I think that vision leaks. Promises from our heart can leak. We can let go of them. There's a great moment in the Bible where it talks about the parable of the sower, and one of the things that grabs me from it was that some people lost their salvation or their seed, however you want to even take that and copy paste it over different dynamics that could be applicable to, but the devil comes and steals it. And it's quite often our inability to hold on to that which God has given us that actually stops it from being coming to fruition. And that's why I believe God, even John the Baptist's dad, which was Stephen, I think, wasn't it? Was it Stephen or Zechariah, that spoke early about the angel and questioned the promise. He got silenced. And the next time he gets to actually speak again is the moment he writes the promise down. He writes the name and he gets his voice back. And I think quite often we underrate the power of fighting our doubts and our pain with professing the promises over our life, so that the dark season, and I said this on Sunday, a really good winter from a farmer's perspective will kill the rodents, kill the pests, but not the seed. And so sometimes we walk through seasons that are cold and dark enough to do those things, and it's our job to protect the seed at all costs. And you protect it through praising God for the promise, praising Him for the breakthrough that's going to come, and remembering the promises and things that are being spoken over your life. That's how I've had to walk out some of the darker seasons where I couldn't take a sabbatical, I couldn't walk away from the pulpit, I couldn't walk away from being a dad. I had to shoulder that burden at the same time as finding God in it.
That's good. Thank you.
Miriam Moreno, how do you personally identify and develop future leaders? What qualities or traits do you look for? Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing I look for is what they see. I've said for a long time that you know a leader by their eyes, like what sticks out to them and what doesn't stick out to them. If they don't see the problems in the room, quite often they're not the leader. If they don't see things and act on them, they're not the leader. I've watched that leaders have good eyes. I always go back to a moment where Audrey's younger brother, one of her younger brothers, it was my first interaction in church. I was sitting in her father's church. It was a packed service. There was a ministry call. Her brother was in the actual other corner of the room. There was a guy crying in this corner of the room in front of me. Her brother was in a season where he's kind of aloof-ish and distant, and I just remember this guy's crying. Her brother grabbed a box of tissues, walked all the way down the front, came and handed it to him. In that room, it was packed. In that room, not everybody would have seen, but a leader has an uncanny line of sight for opportunity, for problem, for care, for what the actual problem is, not the perceived problem. And leaders just have an uncanny line of sight. So the first person I would spend time on is the person with line of sight. The second thing I would do is always pick work rate over brilliance. Brilliant people quite often don't have a good work rate because their gifting makes up most of the ground. And a lot of people that are gifted don't actually meet it with work rate. And what I would say is that work rate is a greater revealer of character and a greater revealer of conviction than gifting. because work rate is quite often somebody doing something that they don't feel gifted at, but man, they're just so convinced that they're just going to do it. And I would always pick work rate over brilliance, because in essence, work rate is this to me. Work rate is fruit tasted, whereas brilliance is like fruit told. Like, we know that you got potential, we know you're great, but it hasn't manifested to something. The Bible says wisdom is proven by her fruit. And so I like to see the fruit of effort, not the fruit of gifting. Unfortunately, the most gifted in the world don't always go as far as they should. And I think someone that is the most unique person in most of our lives that we've ever heard of, where both gifting and work rate met together, is Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. And Michael Jordan more so, where gifting and work rate were actually hand in hand. You just don't often see that. So 2 things I would say is pick work rate. Last thing, and I'll do a third thing, teachability.
Yeah.
Like, teachability is huge. I don't want a leader that wants to show how great they are. It's not their moment to shine. I want someone that's a perpetual learner.
Yeah, so good.
Because that's going to just be the case always. You've just always got to be willing to learn.
Yeah.
And so I think it's their teachability, their eyes, and their work rate. Those 3 things you can pick well.
I think personally in my ministry years, I think the moments that I have probably made the biggest mistakes have been when I've listened to people when they've come with their resume and they've just talked about all the things they've done, the churches they've been to, the churches they were employed at. And there is a sense of being like, wow, here's the answer. This is the person we've been praying for. This is the person that we need. And then you put them in somewhere and it ends up becoming the worst move for your team, for the department, and ultimately for the church. So you have to make sure that you have a period of time where you get to know the people and you get to see them in action and in their workflow, because people talk a really good game. And I think in this age, like, your resume makes a way for you. And I think that people kind of use that in church as well. But as a leader, you end up paying the price for that.
Can I just say, in that, I have not once yet, I mean, I'm still to this day, and I'm not saying this lightly, I have never been handed a resume that someone has lived up to. Not once. Not even close. No one presently in People Church, sitting at this table or beyond, has ever given me a resume they lived up to. Because what looks good on paper isn't always reality. It's just not. It's just not. It's an accolade. It's a collection of your written accomplishments. But they could have been for a week.
Yeah, that's good.
No, like, I want to see that back to back to back. So this is what I would say to everyone in this room, both on how you pick and how you live. Be someone who leads with your results, not with your resume.
Yeah.
If you have to say, I'm the kind of person that, or I've always been really good at, don't tell me, show me. Wait for the opportunity and then shine. If it's your day to be quarterback because the other quarterback broke their arm that day, don't say how good you throw. Just quietly get out there and let your results lead to your actual titles. Let your results lead you to promotion. I'll tell you what it'll do for you is it is a guarantee that you will live with peace. It is much harder to have to live to the results you've spoken about, the resume you've spoken about, than let the results be your promoter. Because when they promote you, you know that you could do the job because you just did the job.
Right.
And what I say about that too is this. Any context changes everything. I've watched, and this is something that anyone that loves sport would attest to. You could take 5 athletes that are brilliant, chuck them on one team, amazing. Chuck them on the next team, a mess. Because chemistry, context, season, you slow down, you shift, you have kids, you don't have kids, you have work, seasons hit you. the best thing you can always do is let the results of your season speak for themselves. And if the anointing is there, if the mantle is there, and the results are there, promotion will follow.
Yeah, it's good.
But lead with your results. Don't lead with your resume. Save that for the corporate space. And even then, is every Christian called to lead in some capacity? How do you carry over spiritual leadership, for example, in church to secular leadership roles? I believe, yes, every leader, every Christian is called to lead in some capacity. But that operative word being capacity. What is your capacity? Capacity can be changed according to season. Capacity can change according to gifting. And I think that sometimes you might have on your life to be a leader of thousands, but sometimes you're in a season of leading 12. And I think you've got to understand that. And I think that every Christian is called to lead. And then the spiritual, how do you carry over spiritual leadership, for example, in church, to secular leadership roles? I think it's this: understand that ultimately, as a leader and as a kingdom leader, it goes back to something we said in the earlier part of the Staffy, which is you don't lead things, you lead people. You're always leading people. You lead people well, and the things will turn out. But if you're leading people and it's spiritual and you've had a spiritual awakening because you know who Jesus is, I think it changes intrinsically your values. So instead of leading something that is completely face value based on performance in your company, you realize that any mantle of leadership is an opportunity to change the people that you are leading, to invest into them, to love on them, to give them a hope of who Jesus is, to introduce them to Jesus. Like, whether that be that you reflect Jesus so well that they are hungry for more, I would just go this, that every leader should leave people like thirsty. If we're the salt, then what we do should make them want more living water. We should be that kind of salt. And if you are that in the workplace, I would say this, like, don't hold you're not just leading results. You're not just leading a team to better sales. Yes, you want to break sales targets, but what will get you promoted to the upper echelons would be that you left a team in a better place than you found it. Because here's the thing you got to know about leadership. There's more than one way to skin a cat, and there's way more ways to build a team. And you could build a team with results, but kill people on the way to do it. And what I've noticed is there's a man way to build and a God way to build. The man way to build builds faster and implodes quickly. And the God way to build starts slower and explodes apparently overnight, but it's a God way to build. Build good people, and your value will be something that you could never put a price on.
I have a question. Let's say God's stirring your heart for something fresh, like in your spirit. It's like in alignment with, what you feel called to do and all of that. What would you say is like a timeline? Like, when the Lord stirs something new in you, Pastor Chris or Pastor Audrey, and you feel, ooh, there's like an urgency in my spirit that I'm feeling towards this thing. I'm getting a lot of vision for this thing. There's something about this that's ticking in me. How much time do you guys, in wisdom, pray on such a thing before you really think, before you tap into it? Obviously praying, getting wisdom from the Lord, but I feel like sometimes I can be so zealous. I get so pumped about something, and I'm like, that's it, I'm diving in head first. What's your I feel this is a wise, I'm gonna sleep on this for however many days kind of thing.
I think a fair few things. If you're always getting something new, that's a problem. Depends how big the new thing is. Because if it's new and nuanced, do it straight away. If it's new and big, do you know what I mean? There's only so many times you can point that cruise ship in a new direction before you give people seasickness. So you want to be a steadfast leader, and you want to create stable environments. And if you're constantly changing vision for your own life or for the things you lead, that's always going to become a problem. So my decision would be weighed upon that. My decision would be weighed upon collateral. What's the collateral this provides? How many stakeholders does this affect? Do you know what I mean? If this is just a me thing, I'll do it tomorrow. If this has got stakeholders, I got to talk to them. I got to get God on this. if this has possible collateral, I got to get wisdom on this. Plans fail through a lack of wisdom, the Bible says.
Yes.
So I think there's that. The other thing is I would make sure that I manage my expectations with my God's way of working. So God says things to me to do urgently, but yet he's not ready to manifest them as quick as I want them. Do you know what I mean? What I think is quick and what God says is quick is always, we're never on the same page. Now, God does move quickly, but typically when I think he's going to move slow, he moves quick. And when I think he's going to move quick, he moves slow. So me and him are never on the same page with what's next and quick. But what I do know is that obedience is the most important thing. And what I think is that the ultimate thing is if you trust what you heard from God, it's always going to be confirmed. I think by the people that God has placed in your life to lead with, run with. And I think a huge hallmark and something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable about the New Testament is that it actually relies heavily on unity in the Spirit. It's what Corinthians and a lot of Paul's epistles will talk about, and really it's something that we have to do. So what I mean by that is that, some decisions I'll always run through my my counsel, my group of people that go, if this is wisdom, if this is God, then this will resonate with other people. And what that does is it protects us from our humanity. This is something because here's the other thing I would say, is you might have heard him, but did you interpret him right? Right, exactly. Because I'll never forget, and I've said this so many times, but there's this woman that used to be on Oprah, and she heard God say that it's your anointed time, but not your appointed time. So then she went to Oprah saying, I got to be released. And Oprah's like, I'm not going to stand in the way between you and God, and released her. But when the minute the statement jumped out, I was like, you fool. It couldn't be more clear. Anointing and appointing. Look at David. That's just, it's your time to work in what you're good at, but you're not sent yet. And so she missed it. And she missed it because she interpreted from a desire. And what does Galatians say that I preached on, right? That it is your own desires that will lead you away. No, in James, that basically it's your own desires that will lead you away, not God tempting you. And I think quite often people do this. They misread what you're saying, Sarah, and then they say, this is a justification statement. I now realize that God just wanted to work something out of me. No. God did not get you off track. You got you off track. Because your desires for position were greater than God's promise and the timing he wanted to give it to you. And I think that is super important. At the same time, another little factor is make sure your apprehension isn't out of fear. Make sure fear isn't your driver for stepping out. The only fear that you should have is fear of God. You should have wisdom, and we should be guided by peace and alerted by unrest. So we should live in peace, alerted by unrest. And I think that is the way that I would implement change. So there's a fair few little implementations there that kind of maybe for me give me my checklist of how quick I implement things. And then as well, by the way, also, acting on something quick is very different to acting on something in completeness. Let's say God tells me it's time to change your team. Okay, cool. I'll start on that tomorrow, but I'm not going to finish it tomorrow. That would be foolish. What, I change a whole team over one night? No way. If God tells me you need to level up this, or you got to shift this, or hey, the church needs to change its culture, would I do that overnight? No, I might start straight away, but my completion date is completely different to my start date.
That's very good.
I think for me personally, when I think of a new endeavor or something that I feel is like a new thing, it could be a personality thing, and I don't know if it's a right or wrong thing, but I just go, I have to, this thing that is in my care or in my hands that I lead, I have to build it correctly. I have to build it and leave it in a better way than I found it. And I have to almost walk away from this knowing that without me, it will stand and go forward before I start entertaining something else. But that's also my personality too. I can't get through a Word document with 1,000 red lines. I have to go through every word and fix everything as I go writing a document. So I don't necessarily know if that's the be all and end all of the next thing, but I know for me personally, that's my conviction.
I think it's a great that's a principle. How you finish one season will determine how you start the next.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's super important to finish things well.
Yes.
Paul says in confidence, hey, I built this like a master builder.
Yeah.
But just know that whatever you build, the fire will test it.
Yeah.
And so he's kind of really confident that he discipled well. He built this thing well. And therefore, over to you guys.
Yeah.
So I think make sure that once you hand something on, it's going to be a greater revealer of your leadership than when it was in your hands. Because when it's in your hands, you know which angle presents best. You know, you're like, this is the angle where if you ever done a school project and then you hand it over and they go to carry it different than you carry it and you're like, no, don't carry it like that because the back will fall off. You know, I think that's the way we hand on teams. We're like, no, this is the way it stays all together. And what we really got to do is you could be able to throw it at someone and it would still be intact.
Yeah. I mean, just transparently, I've been even asking the question, like, God, is ministry and people church, for me personally, is this the only thing that I will do for the rest of my life?
Yeah.
And it's just I'm posing the question because I've never explored outside of it. And I mean, it'll be something I'll always do. It'll be the main thing I'll always do. But in connection to people church, like, is there something else that won't compete with it, but is there something else I will put my hands to? And so it got me thinking, and I'm like, well, if there's ever anything outside of this, I want to make sure that whatever I am leading, I'm building it firm and strong and building it the best way that I can so that I can be released to more.
So good. Or to start another church, guys.
I'm out. People Church Indiana.
Yeah, people's. No, she puts a the. The People Church. All right, lucky last question. Lucky last.
No.
Yeah, I have a question for Pastor Gio. So I had this question a while ago, but I forgot about it. It was at retreat, and I noticed the way that you were answering the questions, you would be very self-aware about your strengths, but then self-aware of like your blind spots. And I guess like, how do you navigate that when you're like having to make this other decision, or like where you can't just go back and reflect, like, this is my blind spot or this is my strength, where I should operate from, if that makes sense.
That's a great question, Lexi.
Yeah. Okay, so your question is, how do I make decisions being aware of my blind spots and my strengths? Is that a good way to summarize it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think I have people in my life that I can check with, I guess is a word to use, right? But I also know where I am not great at, and I think I've placed people around me that are good at areas that I am weak. And I lean on those people in those right times. I'm also actively trying to be better at some of the areas of my life that are blind spots. I think as I've gone through this ministry thing, I started to build a library of experiences I can also pull from, which helped me gauge what kind of decisions I should be making, as well as understanding that sometimes there is going to be collateral. Sometimes you are going to make a mistake in the call that you make, right? Over the years, I think I've been better at reconciling those mistakes, right? And actually calling them mistakes or misses and learning from them. I think early on, I probably would have been more hard-headed around that, and maybe come up with excuses. But I think with time, I've learned that those mistakes actually make me a better leader. So I take all those things into account as I make decisions for the most part, right? And I think the bigger part here is just you're not always going to get it right. And if you're a leader that thinks they are always going to get it right, I think it's going to stop you from actually growing.
So good.
I've been okay with the miss. I'm okay with the loss. I'm okay with a little bit of collateral if it means that I'm going to grow through it, and that the next time I am going to make the right decision. So that's kind of my thought process with it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I think there's also a level of self-awareness that you have to have as well. Like, you have to be really secure in knowing that you don't have to have it all together. You don't have to know everything. And also you have to be aware that you do have blind spots, and you also have to be aware of like your propensities, how you think, how you feel, what triggers you, what environments, you know, you feel like you have chemistry in, and what are the environments you don't, and what are the things that frustrate you as a leader, what are the things that really just like, you know, just set you through the roof. Like, I think it's important to just know you and be an examiner and a real student of self, because the more you learn about yourself, the more secure and the more able you are to lead without any sense of like, this is all about me.
Yeah.
You have the objective in mind. You know what you have to bring. You have the self-awareness. And like Gio said, you staff your weaknesses. That's the best thing you could do. Get people around you that can do the things that you can't do. And then don't only get people to do things that you don't want to do because you're being lazy too. Don't be a lazy leader. I said this like the beginning of, I think I told Marlene this, I'm like, man, I want to be the hardest working person in our church. Like, I want to work hard. Like, I want to set an example of not like being a workaholic and being addicted to work because it brings me worth, but because I love it so much, I want to be committed and dedicated to the work. And I think when you are, you lead the way in that way. So,
That's great.
I think that was a really good question.
And can I just say to that, like, something I took away from what they both said was, don't be afraid of trying more things. You know, they both spoke about self-awareness, and self-awareness comes from self-discovery, and discovery needs to be brought out from you. So you got to try some things, you know. You may surprise yourself that you're good at things you didn't think you were good at, and you also may equally surprise yourself that you're not good at things you thought you were good at. And I think just don't let fear hold you back from trying new things, stepping in, keep saying yes to the opportunities before you. And then if your value is not actually hidden in your performance, but you know that redemptively God's got you, you've got the same value as anybody else, then what you can do then is you could keep like fumbling your way. And much like Gio and what Ord said, I discovered things I was good at that I had no idea I was good at. And then there was things that I thought I was going to nail, and I was like, oh wow, that's just not me. And you know, that's how that goes. So just keep trying things.